I bet you've been hearing a great deal about pupils who identify as cats and horses, unicorns, giraffes. It's been all over the papers. People have been discussing it on social media. Maybe you've been perplexed and bewildered. Maybe you know exactly what they're talking about. Equalities Minister Kemi Badenoch has called for inspectors to be sent into school. It's one particular school, and it's at the centre of a row over pupils reportedly identifying as cats. The school has said it's reviewing its processes after the incident came to light. So how big an issue is this? Teenagers identifying as animals. They call them furries. And should we be worried about it? Maybe you used to think you were a horse when you were a child and you used to gallop about the place and trot. Maybe you used to have to get your mum or dad to give you some straw so you could bed down for the night. Maybe you had a carrot dangled in front of you perpetually. I don't know. Maybe you don't find anything strange about it at all. You think it's just a phase of life and eventually young people grow out of it. Let's talk about this with Mark Lehain, Head of Education at the Centre for Policy Studies and former Special Advisor at the Department of Education. Hi, Mark.
Hi, good evening.
Hello. So tell me about this, young people identifying as cats or horses or some other animal. Is this common? Is it very unusual? Is it a phase? Is it serious? I mean, people have been absolutely bewildered by it, frankly.
It's certainly caught the imagination of a lot of people this week. I think the honest answer to your question, how widespread is it? We just don't know. It could potentially just be one of those sort of urban myth types things that are doing the rounds. But for me personally, if I had to go with my gut instinct, I think I've heard enough different kinds of stories from people that I trust to think there are some cases of these going on. I don't really want to talk about any specific individual cases because there's young people at the centre of it.
No, that's fine.
But yeah, I think there probably is some of this going on. And I think probably the reason why it's triggered people or got people's interest this week is it's so similar or so bound up with the broader challenges that schools and society more widely are grappling with, which is that around young people who are gender questioning or who say they're transgender. That has grown massively in terms of numbers in recent years. Schools have been trying to deal with that. And I think the reason why that Rye College case particularly jumped out at people wasn't just because it was alleged there was a young person in that school that was a cat or identified as a cat, but because the teacher was telling off the young ladies in question for not buying into the gender identity ideas. And that, I think, is probably the biggest concern that most people have. We can't force people to believe a controversial idea if it's not something they buy into. And we certainly shouldn't be doing that in school.
So, I mean, in a way, you're conflating the whole thing and making it even more confusing. I'm not sure you're not doing that on purpose, but as soon as we say a young person who identifies as a cat, and then you say, yes, this, controversy about transgender or, children who are gender fluid or children who are questioning their gender or their identity or whatever it is they identify as, that makes it, I think, less clear and more confusing, doesn't it? Because if you think you're a cat or if you identify as a cat, that's nothing to do with gender, it's nothing to do with sexuality, it's nothing to do with any of those things. It's a completely different thing, isn't it?
Well, for some people would argue it's actually just an extension of the identity mindset that some people believe you should be able to have, that you can identify whatever you wish, that's a personal choice, and that people should respect that. So please, I'm not trying to conflate the two. What I'm saying is I think the two are quite close to one another, and that's why it's triggering and upsetting so many people and certainly raising so many hackles and getting so much attention, because schools do have a genuine issue about how do they support young people with gender questioning. And then alongside that, there appear to be, if reports are accurate, we don't know, but if those reports are accurate, there appear to be a small but significant number of young people that are, if you like, going the next step and saying that they identify as something else. For me, the key thing is how do schools look after the young people they've got with kindness and compassion, but also help them guide their way through childhood. When you're young, you think all sorts of things. That's why childhood is such a special time. That's why children don't have the same legal responsibilities.
Mark, I don't want to interrupt you, and yet I feel I must. I'm sorry, but gender fluidity, transgender, feeling that you are maybe in the wrong body or maybe in the wrong gender, that you feel and identify very strongly as the gender that you weren't born into but feel as if, is absolutely yourself and your soul, and you're very, very unhappy if you can't be identified as the gender you feel very strongly that you are. that is a very serious thing. And I mean, I first started making programmes about that in 1994, and I've never forgotten them, because I remember the individuals concerned who said had they not been able to, to trans, they would have had to kill themselves. They just couldn't carry on living in the body and the gender that they had been born into. They tried, many of them tried so hard. They tried to do all these kind of gender normative things in order to kind of reinforce their own sense of being whatever it was they felt that they were supposed to be and society told them they had to be, and they couldn't carry on living like that. It was unbearable, it was impossible, and they would have had to. They've said, take their lives if they were made to do that. That's how serious it was. So we all understand, I think, at least I hope we do, that if a child or a young person is struggling with those sorts of feelings and issues, it's extremely serious, and it really must be taken with, absolute, care and concern and delicacy, and, the child concerned or the pupil concerned may, in the end, decide that actually they do begin to feel more comfortable with the gender that they were assigned at birth, or may not, but whatever it is, it's important to give it due prominence and gravitas, because it's a big deal. But a child or a pupil who identifies as a cat, that's not surely, and you may tell me I'm quite wrong, and if you will, I'm prepared to learn about this, because this is all quite strange to me, but surely that's not something that has to be taken with immense seriousness and carefully dealt with, and absolutely, refined gravitas in the way you deal with it, because people are not cats. People are people, and there's nothing at all you can do to become a cat. There just isn't, and you never will be one, and you'll never be four-legged, and you'll never be furry, and if you really, really want to lap milk out of a saucer, I suppose you really can, but it's, it's not going to be a kind of promising line of inquiry, is it? So is it not acceptable and possible to say, listen, you're delightful, you're not a cat, sorry about that?
Hey, listen, my hunch is that if I was back in schools as a head teacher or a teacher and a young person was saying that to me, that's exactly the kind of thing I would be saying to them. But I think I just want to come back to what you were saying about the way that lots of people understand or express their gender identity. Yeah. You've explained really coherently. I hope sorry, that's very teacher of me, but you've explained really well what lots of people feel about gender identity. There are lots of other people out there, though, and in fact, the majority of public opinion polls would suggest take a slightly different view, which is you may decide that you identify or you want to express your life according to male or female stereotypes, but men cannot be women. That's a gender critical view. And no matter what you might try and do, if you're a biological male, to live like a woman, whatever that means, you can't become a woman. Now, that's a controversial idea. Both sides of those are contested by different people, and hence that's why we have to be very careful about how we engage and support young people. Affirmation, confirming whatever young people says about their gender identity, is probably not the way to go, particularly as what little evidence we do have over the decades suggests that the vast majority of youngsters who say that they are gender questioning, that think they might want to live according to the different sex to that which they are, actually, with what's called watchful waiting, grow through that phase and revert to more, the more mainstream way of doing things. So I think you've described maybe your views really, really coherently, but lots of people don't hold that view, and they might feel that gender identity is no more of a stretch or of an out there idea than people identifying as an animal. And all I'm trying to say is that we've got to support young people. We mustn't immediately affirm everything they tell us. Yeah. We might take it seriously, but the key thing is we've got to support them, try and get to the bottom of why they're unhappy, involve their families all the way through. And then the evidence would suggest from experience and other research that the vast majority of young people will go through that phase and will revert to how they were when, in terms of their gender being the same as their sex.
And so imagine that one of your schools, a young person identified as a cat. Would you have to phone the parents and explain, or would you have to call the child by a pet's name at school? Would you have to? I mean, what would you do? Where would you draw the line at something like that?
Well, if you think, there's a couple of things to say there. First of all, gender reassignment is a protected characteristic, and that is the legal process under the Equality Act, whereby transgender people have protection to try and express their gender identity as they wish. As far as I know, species reassignment is not something that we have in law. So if a young person was saying that to me, I would first of all get their parents involved straight away. Parents should always and ever be involved. if you've got concerns or questions about a young person, unless there is an urgent and immediate risk to their safety from what you're dealing with. I doubt that would be the case if I had a young person expressing themselves as an animal. And I want to get to the bottom of why they're thinking like that. Normally, if children are behaving in a very unusual way, there's something behind it. There's an unhappiness, or there's something they're trying to get their head around, or there's an influence they've come under. And I think it's important that as adults in their lives, all adults, you explore the driving forces behind that. You don't just take the first thing they tell you. And I think most adults that work with young people would say you should do that for all these sorts of things, whether it is these cases we're hearing about at the moment about young people identifying as animals, or whether it's young people that say their gender identity is different. All those things, we need to support them and work through it. And normally, watchful waiting is the best way to go.
I must say, we had a headmaster on the other day, and he said that he did have a pupil who, when he addressed the pupil, would meow back at him instead of speaking in words. And he referred the pupil for help with mental health, because it was a mental health issue. That's what it was. People didn't have to be taken seriously as somebody who thought they really were a cat, but was definitely, as you quite rightly say, expressing, you know, pain and trouble and a troubled kind of personality by meowing, and that was what had to be taken seriously. Really appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much for being on the programme. That's Mark Lehain.